Elena Vasquez had spent 15 years building a prison so comfortable she'd mistaken it for a home. It was a gilded cage, constructed not of iron bars, but of polished mahogany and soft, expensive carpet. The key to her cell was a company ID badge on a lanyard that hung around her neck, a constant, gentle weight she barely noticed anymore. She was the Senior Director of Strategic Synergy at Aethelred Corp, a title so meaningless it required 3 words just to sound important. Her days were a blur of color-coded spreadsheets, jargon-filled conference calls, and the quiet, persistent hum of the office HVAC system. From the outside, it was a masterpiece. The corner office on the 37th floor offered a breathtaking view of the city's skyline. The salary afforded a sleek apartment, a wine subscription, and yearly vacations to places she photographed but never truly saw. Her mother in Guadalajara bragged to the neighbors about her daughter, the ejecutiva. Her friends nodded with approval when she mentioned quarterly reports and leadership retreats. But inside the cage, Elena was starving. It started as a faint, ignorable unease, a dull ache on Sunday evenings as the sun began to set, a feeling of her soul compressing to fit into the stiff-tailored suit she wore. She'd soothe it with a glass of Pinot Noir and the promise of a promotion, a bonus, a new title that would finally make her feel as substantial as the life she'd built. Then came the day of the brand alignment and narrative integration meeting. Her boss, a man named Kendrick, whose face was the color and texture of unbaked bread, was droning on about leveraging our core competencies to optimize paradigm shifts. The air in the conference room was stale, recycled through vents that hadn't been cleaned since the Clinton administration. Elena stared at the PowerPoint slide, a confusing matrix of arrows and circles designed by a consulting firm that had charged more than her father made in a year, and felt a sudden, violent snap inside her chest. It was as if a rubber band, stretched thin for 15 years, had finally broken. She looked at the faces around the table, 15 highly paid professionals, all nodding with the intense, vacuous focus of cult members. They were discussing a new logo, a slightly different shade of blue. This was the summit of their collective ambition. This was the mountain she had been climbing her entire adult life. A profound and terrifying clarity washed over her. This is not my life. The thought wasn't a whisper, it was a shout. It was so loud she was certain everyone in the room could hear it. But the droning continued. Kendrick was now explaining how the new logo would speak to our synergistic future. Elena's hand, seemingly of its own accord, reached up and unclipped the lanyard from around her neck. The weight, which she had always imagined as negligible, suddenly felt like an anchor. She placed the badge, her face, her name, her title, her cage on the glossy conference table. The clatter it made was sharp, a small sound that somehow echoed in the padded, sterile room. Kendrick paused, his mouth a perfect of surprise. "Elena, is everything all right?" She looked at him, and for the first time in years, she felt no need to filter her thoughts. "No, Kendrick, it's not, but it's going to be." She stood up, pushed her chair in, and walked out. 15 pairs of eyes bored into her back, a mix of shock, confusion, and something that looked a lot like envy. She didn't look back. In the elevator, descending the 37 floors, her heart hammered against her ribs. What have I done? The voice of reason, the warden of her gilded cage, was screaming. "Your rent, your 401k, your reputation. You're a senior director. You don't just walk away. But another voice, small and hoarse from years of silence, whispered back, I just did. The lobby was a blur of polished granite and hurrying people. She pushed through the revolving doors and stepped onto the sidewalk. The city air hit her a pungent mix of hot pretzels, diesel fumes, and damp garbage, and it smelled like freedom. The first few weeks were a terrifying, exhilarating freefall. She sold most of her designer clothes. She gave away the wine. She moved out of her sleek apartment and into a small, sun-drenched studio in a neighborhood filled with artists and the smell of baking bread from the corner panaderia. Her savings were a finite, dwindling number that she checked obsessively, each withdrawal a small step away from the cliff of financial security. Her mother wept. Has she lost her mind? She asked the saints. Her friends were polite, then confused, then distant. They couldn't understand, abandoning a perfectly good cage for the terrifying, empty wilderness. And it was terrifying. There were mornings Elena woke up in a cold sweat, paralyzed by the lack of structure, the absence of emails demanding her attention. She felt invisible, a ghost without a title. She would wander through her days, adrift in a sea of possibility she was too scared to navigate. One Tuesday, she found herself in a small park near her new apartment. She sat on a bench, watching an old man meticulously feed the pigeons, his movements slow and deliberate. A young mother chased a giggling toddler. A teenager, earbuds in, practiced skateboard tricks with focused determination. They were all doing something. They were all living their lives, not just managing someone else's. And for the first time, the fear subsided. It was replaced not by a grand, sweeping plan, but by a simple, quiet question. What do I actually want? She closed her eyes and sifted through the rubble of her former life. She didn't miss the meetings or the meaningless metrics, but she did miss the moments of genuine connection with her team. She missed the spark of an idea, the joy of crafting a narrative that actually meant something. She remembered, buried deep, the little girl who used to write stories in a tattered notebook, the girl who wanted to be a writer before she was told to be practical. That night, she dug out an old laptop and opened a blank document. She didn't try to write a business plan or a strategic overview. She just wrote. She wrote about the old man and the pigeons, about the smell of the panaderia, about the terrifying, liberating feeling of stepping off the 37th floor and into the unknown. She wrote about fear and about courage. A month later, she started a blog. She called it The Unlocked Life. Her first post was simply titled, The Day I Left My Name on the Table. She wrote it not as a cautionary tale or a manifesto, but as a story. Her story. The response was slow at first, a comment here, a share there. Then an email from a woman in Ohio who said Elena's words had given her the courage to quit a job she hated and go back to school for nursing. Then another from a man in London who was terrified of retiring because his work was his only identity. Elena realized she wasn't just writing, she was connecting. She was doing what she was always meant to do. Building bridges with words, not spreadsheets. Slowly, organically, a new career took root. She started offering writing workshops for people who felt trapped, helping them tell their own stories of transition. She was hired by small companies to write copy that was human and authentic, not riddled with corporate jargon. She wasn't rich, not by Aethelred Corp standards, but for the first time, she felt wealthy. One afternoon, about a year after she walked out, she was walking through her neighborhood. She passed a small boutique with a handwritten sign in the window. Storyteller in residence wanted. Inquire within. She smiled. It was a sign, perhaps not from the universe, but from the part of herself she had finally learned to trust. She didn't walk in right away. Instead, she stood on the sidewalk, feeling the sun on her face and the solid ground beneath her feet. She thought of the cage on the 37th floor. She thought of the terror of the freefall and the peace of the landing. Her phone buzzed. A text from her mother. "I made your favorite enchiladas. Are you coming for dinner?" She typed back a quick, "Si, Mama, on my way." And as she slipped the phone into her pocket, she realized her hands were empty. No lanyard, no badge, no title, just Elena. And that, she finally understood, was more than enough. The courage hadn't been in the walking away. That was just the first step. The real courage was in staying away, in building a life from the ground up, brick by brick, with her own two hands, on her own terms. It was the courage to be, not just to do, and it was the most beautiful thing she had ever built. The moral of the story. True courage is not found in the comfort of what we know, but in the terrifying freedom of choosing what is real. It is easy to stay in a life that looks perfect from the outside, even when it feels empty within. But the greatest act of bravery is to listen to the small, quiet voice that whispers, "This is not my life," and to trust that the unknown path, however frightening, is better than a gilded cage. Real wealth is not measured in titles, salaries, or the approval of others. It is found in the peace of becoming who you were always meant to be, not who the world told you to become. When you have the courage to walk away from a life that doesn't fit, you make room for a life that does. And that life built with your own hands, lived on your own terms, is the only one worth living.